Hi everyone, welcome to the last JavaScript video, which is on arrays and loops. So what arrays are is that they're just simply variables that can carry multiple values. So they're assigned in much the same way as a normal variable, except you can put in multiple values. But they do differ from objects, which we did earlier, because in the case of objects, we're putting in usually a field name and then a value, whereas in arrays, we're just simply putting in value after value. But they're very useful for things like if you've got large amounts of data and you just want to store it and then search for it. And the way that we search for it is using loops, which is why we're doing these two concepts together. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so to assign an array or create a new array, we're going to create a constant, and I'm going to give it the name myArray. And to tell the computer that it actually is an array, use square brackets, and then we can put our values in. Now, if you leave the brackets blank like this, for example, what you're doing is creating an array with no values in it, and that's sometimes useful if you want to create an array to then collect information as your program goes along. Now, to store some values in there, what we want to do is we're going to give them values, and in between each value we give them a comma, and that will store those three values. Now, to display individual values, if we put in console.log just to see what we're looking at, if we put in my array, what we can then, and square brackets, not square, what we can then do is we can then select the which element we want to display. Now the elements are numbered in the same way as they are in Python, where the first element in an array is assigned the value of 0, and then the second is 1, then 2, etc. So if, for example, we want to assign the value, we want to look at element 1, we can do that and we'll save it, and what you'll get the uh, in the console is you get the value 20, which is the second value in the array, or element number 1. Now so that's how you see a value. So obviously if you were searching for a value in an array, you could also apply a logic test, so like equal to 20 or something like that, which is something that we will do a little bit later. Okay, and to add a value to an array, so an array can have as many values as you like, we use the command push. So push in normal brackets and the value that you want to insert, and you can insert strings as well, and you can also put variables in and it will store the value. So if we do that, that will add a value to the array. So if we want to see that it's actually done it, what we can then do is put in log my array, okay, and that should hopefully show us an array that now has 4 values associated with it. So come across and you'll see now we have 4 values, and 100 is added to the end. So when you add those values, it's added to the end. Now, in case you may also need to, at stages, reassign a value of an existing. So let's say that value of 20 we now want to be 50, for example. What we would do, pretty straightforward, is we would put in my array, and then we can put in the value that we want to put in. So sorry, square brackets. So which tells us that we want the value 20, because that's the second element in there, and then we can reassign it. So if we put in 50, okay, and again what we'll do is we'll show our array to show that that's changed that value. So what you should see is 10, 50, 30, then the 100, which was the one we added before. Okay, and you'll see that's done that and changed that. So the array has been updated. Now the other thing that you may want to do is remove values from an array. Okay, so the way to do the array, and I've actually just forgotten the code, so I'm going to quickly have a look, is yep, splice. That's right. Okay. So to remove values from an array, we're using the value array and then the method splice. Okay, and then there are two variables that we want to put in. One is what is the element we're starting at that we want to remove, and then how, which in this case, if we said we're going to remove element 1, and then the second thing we want to know is how many elements do we want to remove? Do we want to remove 1? And so if we put in 2, it's going to remove the second value, 20, well now 50, and 30. So if we want to remove 2, and then we can rerun our console to see what's happened to the array. Save. We'll go back to our thing, and you can see that we've started at this variable here, and we've removed these two values as expected. So that's how you can splice values in and out. Now, so that's pretty much arrays in a nutshell. Now, if arrays do have methods associated with them. So those pretty much the most useful method is one called length. So if you put in my array dot length, it will return the number of values within the array. So at this stage, there's only 2 left because we removed 2, and we'll just put the values, display them on the console. And if we go back to our web page, you'll see there's 2. So it tells you the number of values. Now the reason that's useful is because what programmers often have to do is they might collect a large amount of information in an array, and to make their code efficient, and if they want to loop through that array, they need to know how many elements. So in this case, if I needed to have an array that looped through only these 2 elements, then I know, okay, there's 2 there, and then we need to start at 0. We need our loop to go from element 0 to element 1. And conversely, if we had the 4 in here, we'd know, okay, we have 4 elements, so therefore we've got to go from 0 to element 3. So, and you can use length to find that. So length minus 1 is going to be 0 to length minus 1 would be the number of values in a loop that you would use for an array. So that just makes your coding efficient. You don't have to loop any more or any less. You don't have to guess how many elements are in there. So that's pretty much arrays in a nutshell. Where arrays are most commonly used, where I use them a lot, is, for example, if we've got large amounts of data. So let's say we have a whole heap of customers. We might put the customer name in one array, one after another, and then we might have, let's say we're looking at their sales value. We might have in another array the sales value. Now, the reason I use arrays like that is if let's say we're looking for what is the sales value in a given array. If we go down that array and find that one of the customers is IKEA, we go down and find IKEA, and we know the array element, and then we can use that array element in the other array to find the sales value. So that's how they often get used. So even though there is only a single value, you can actually store multiple values in multiple arrays if they're aligned, kind of almost like a table in Excel, if that makes sense. Okay, so the second concept that we want to cover is loops. So as I said, loops are very, very useful because they allow, and we'll get rid of it, they allow you to use the same code over and over again in different ways. Okay, so if we start by letting a value equal I, now the reason we're using let in this case is because we need a variable that's going to change constantly. So I is often, you'll often see them used in loops. It stands for integer, so it's basically the counter in a loop. And there are 2 types of loop we're going to show you. The first is a while loop. So a while loop is basically structured so we have a condition. It's very similar to an if statement, a condition, and then it has some code that we want to run. Okay, so in this case, if we wanted to do a loop, if we didn't put a condition in, it would just keep going. But if we say while I is less than and equal to, whoops, less than and equal to 5, then run this code. Okay, so and if we want to show what the value of I is in any given moment, we can put that on the console. And then obviously the other important thing, because if we don't put this second line in, you'll end up in an infinite loop, is that we want I equals I plus 1. So what that means is that we basically we let our I equal a value of 5. Sorry, we won't make it 5. We'll make it 0. And as it goes through, the first thing it does when it moves through the code, it goes to while, looks at the condition and says, is this true? Now, in the first case, I is less than 5, so it runs the code. So it will display the value 0 on the console. Now, to then get it to count up to the next I to check the next value. We would then say I equals I plus 1. So that means the second time it goes through the loop, it's going to equal a 1, and then it's going to print 1 on the console. So if we run it now on your loop, you're going to get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you can see that in itself is not very useful, but when we combine it with array values, so for example, if we want to have, we'll create an array, okay, and let's say we want my array again, and let's say we want to give ourselves the value of 10, 20, 30. Now we had 40, 50, and 60 in our array. So what we can then do is we can use a loop to loop through the elements in the array. Now, if we do that now, what we can do is we can say, well, we're going to print my array, and then we're going to use our elements, our square brackets, to use I as the thing that's going to move through. So the first time it moves through, it's going to return the value of 10 because it's element 0, then 20, then 30, then 40. So this kind of shows you how you would, so you'll see now it's moved through the array, is that how you might use it to look through a series of values. Now where the length comes in, if we want to say create another constant called say we'll call it array length, and then we can say my array dot length, and we'll display that value just so we're 100% sure what it's returning. Console.log, and what are we doing? Array length. Okay, so we can see that value. Now we'll just run the code first. Okay, so we have an array of a length of 6. Okay, now that tells us the number of elements. So instead of having a hard-coded value in here, what we can do is we can have that value match up to the length of the array, and then use it to work out how many times we need to go through the loop. So if the actual number that we need is actually, if the array is 6, we actually need the value 5. So to create that number for the loop, we can just put -1 on there. And if we have array length, instead of a hard-coded number, then we have a dynamic value. So if someone comes along and adds another 2 elements, for example, okay, this is still going to work and it's going to display all the values in the code. Whereas okay, so you can see it all now. It's displaying every value in the code depending on the number of values that are added. So that's how you can use an array. Now, obviously, the next thing you might want to do is, if you were using an array to find a value, what you might do, we'll just do one quick example of that, is let's say we know we need to find the value 40, but we know it's in the array somewhere, but we don't know where it is. We can use an if statement to find it. So we could do something like if we need our brackets, if my array equals 40, and then what we could then do is we could then get it to collect that code. So so you collect that I value. So basically you might have a let value equal I array, and then we would need the I value. So what you would be doing by flipping through here is you're collecting the value, and then if you wanted to at the same time collect or you wanted to collect the I value or the element, so you knew which element it was, and value might equal I. That means if you want to display that value on the screen, here you can just put in value instead of I, and it would have collected that value and told you exactly where it is in the array. So that's how you use that in combination with arrays. Now the second thing that we're going to show you is a different type of loop called a for loop. It's pretty similar. So it's pretty similar, we won't worry about. So basically a for loop works in much the same way. So it's just let I equal, I, not 1, I equal 0. And then basically the difference here is we can put in the parameters into the one line with a semicolon between each. And that will pretty much do the same thing. And then we need our I value. So we're putting in our counter in there as well. So we're basically, whoops, what am I doing? Value is less than. So you're putting in the same parameters, and then you're also putting in your counter in there directly. Okay. And that's going to give you the same. So that's your for loop, and then you just put in your. So it's structured in a similar way to an if statement. Then you're putting in your value to do that. Now, so that's pretty much the same sort of structure. It's just laid out in a different way. Now, the last thing we're going to show you too is how you can stop an array running. So, if, for example, we have an array length that we want that's going to flip through 10 values, and we want to stop it early, what we can do is we can put in an if statement. So let's say we wanted it to stop at 8, or once it had found a value, for example, we can put in an if statement to do that. So an example of that might be if we wanted the I value. So if equals a value 8, then we can just put in the command break, and it will break out of the loop and then move on to the next bit of code that might be down below. So that's pretty much loops in a nutshell. So give the exercise at the bottom a go, and then we'll move on to the assignment. All right, cheers, thanks.